Hello out there to everybody out there in YouTube, especially Beatle admirers, and welcome to another of Andre's Artist Profiles. You know, there's a story that I heard on the Beatles anthology from Paul McCartney that one of the reasons why Paul wanted to play with young George Harrison was because he did a really good rendition of the guitar part on the classic rock instrumental Raunchy. You know, I always loved that story. He picked George for instrumental reasons, and you know, I can really see why. George Harrison, you know, I mean, we don't even need to go into the Beatles. They had a big 50th anniversary of being an Ed Sullivan this year. Unfortunately, George Harrison died in 2001 of lung cancer, and he would have been 71 this year had he lived. So there's only two of the Beatles left, Paul and Ringo, of course. But anyway, this is my tribute to George Harrison's music. There's a couple albums by him that I don't have, and some early stuff that I didn't get, but I have the basics, and these are all wonderful albums, and George Harrison knew from his Beatle days how to bring in all kinds of great guests, like, you know, Jim Keltner and Gary Wright and Eric Clapton. Ringo played on a lot of these records, of course. And, of course, the first record is All Things Must Pass. This is the first edition of that album with the original black and white cover, George with his lawn gnomes. Why am I mentioning John, another departed Beatle here? That's another occasion for John Lennon. Anyway, this album contains some absolutely wonderful songs. He got in a little trouble later for a song called My Sweet Lord, which apparently somehow resembled somewhat the Chiffons hit, He's So Fine. I Dig Love is one of my favorite here. You know, Beware of Darkness, What Is Life, I'd Have You Anytime. This is a beautiful, very spaciously produced record with Phil Spector. There's a big cinematic production on this album. The last part of it is a series of instrumental jams. The only vocal is kind of a celebratory song called It's Johnny's Birthday. But, you know, this album is considered one of George Harrison's classics, and it came out in 1970, the year the Beatles kind of dissolved. And he had a lot of songs built up, of course, from his Beatle days when he did this album, so kind of made sense. The next album was a record called Living in the Material World, where George Harrison talked a lot about being a Hare Krishna. And he had a hit off this album called Give Me Love, Give Me Peace on Earth. But it's a very electric, kind of bluesy rock album with songs like the Sue Me, Sue You blues. It's a really, I think in recent years this album has gotten much more of a good rap to it. There's a great picture inside here, if you'll excuse me. There's been a remaster of this album since, but I don't have it. I'm just happy I have the album at all. It's a great record. There's George and all the musicians who played on this album. Anyway, George is the only one in color in that picture. I always like that. Great album from 1973. Worth hearing. The next album is Dark Horse. Now, you know, George had been touring so much that his voice literally started to get a little hoarse on this album. And especially on the hit, which was actually one of the few pop New Year's songs, Ding Dong, Ding Dong. And this album was recorded, like with Joni Mitchell's Court and Spark, with Tom Scott and the LA Express. One of my favorite songs on here is this great 70s jazz pop soul ballad called Far East Man. One of George's best vocals on this album. Really good album despite his vocal problems on some of the songs. There's George right there. Kind of these furry boots. And of course, after this, he released an album called Extra Texture, which is available on CD, but I don't have because I don't really like it very much. I mean, my father really, really dislikes it. I just don't like it that much. I mean, there's not much good material on it. A lot of people are very, you know, in and out on that particular record. Anyway, now this album is one of my favorites. 33 1/3. This has Billy Preston on it, and it was on his first album on his custom label, Dark Horse. He has an old blues song, I believe was a outtake from his first album called Woman Don't You Cry For Me, which is big time, serious, heavy funk out there, folks. and he did a song called Cracker Box Palace about being at Lord Buckley's estate. And this is a very soulful album. He even addressed the issues that he had on his lawsuit with a tune called This Song. And there's also a couple of really beautiful jazz soul kind of ballads. Learning How to Love You and Pure Smoky. These are just fantastic songs. Great album. You should really pick it up if you like George's more soulful side. I take it that that kind of Union Jack glasses that he's wearing might kind of be a parody of the bicentennial thing at the time. I don't know. Anyway, the next album came out in 1979 called George Harrison. He had a song on there called Not Guilty, which is a White Album outtake. And he covered a couple other songs on this album, too. This album almost has the flavor of kind of a Grover Washington album. He started to get more into a soul, jazz, pop kind of sound in the late 70s. This is a remaster, by the way. My copy of 33 1/3 is not. It has that Dark Horse logo on it. I've really come to enjoy that album. It's like a slicker 33 1/3, basically, this record. Now, this record was released on Dark Horse too, but this is the original cover for it. Again, a somewhat more new wave interpretation of George's sound. He starts it out with a song called Blood from a Clone, which is basically him ranting in some degree about the music industry. But the fact of the matter was, he ended up putting a song on here in tribute to the recently slain John Lennon called All Those Years Ago. For all of you Beatles fans out there who might not know this, that was originally due to be a Ringo Starr song from an unreleased Ringo album called Can't Fight Lightning, but it ended up here. And I think there's a picture inside if you open this up. There you go. There's George for you. 1981, somewhere in England. Another album worth checking out. Really great songs on it. He does some Hoagy Carmichael stuff on this. The next album is another one that I think is really underrated, and it's called Gone Troppo. This came out in 1982, and it tanked. It's a really heavy, new wave inflected album. Almost sounds like an ELO type record that ELO would have done at the time. And there's a lot of synthesizers on it, but there's a great instrumental on here called Grease. And the theme song from Time Bandits, Dream Away, and he even does kind of a doo-wop song in I Really Love You, and Wake Up My Love was sort of a hit. It's a great, diverse album. Don't let what the critics say put you off. It is a fantastic record, really. Just unfortunately underrated. Another Dark Horse reissue, you can see that. After 4 or 5 years in the wilderness, he came back with this album called Cloud 9, which actually got George a little bit into the MTV generation. He actually made 2 videos for a cover of I Got My Mind Set on You, and the title track did pretty well, and there was a song about his Beatle days called When We Was Fab. And he had other songs on here like Wreck of the Hesperus. It's a great pop set. I believe Jeff Lynne was involved in producing this. He was. This is an original issue. A little water damage, but I love that CD. Cloud 9 is a fantastic album. But anyway, I digress. That's what I have for George Harrison. And if you don't have any of these albums, or only some of them, check them out. So, posthumously, happy returns to George and his family, and a big shout out to Olivia and Donnie, and of course, Paul and Ringo. This is Andre saying, see you next time.